everyone, Gaijin Goombay here. So, yeah, yandere. You ever heard of it before? I mean, at this point, it's a word in the anime community that's as ubiquitous as the word kawaii at this point. But, for those of us rooted in the otaku era of the glomp and the yaoi paddle, yandere is understood as thus. Rooted in the Japanese words yanderu, to be sick, and dere to be lovesick or overly affectionate, yandere is defined by the Dere Types wiki as, quote, a Japanese archetype used to define a character whose love, admiration, and devotion is so strong that it's expressed in an excessive obsession and possessiveness. They are often seen as characters that are crazy in love with someone. Now, to non-otaku, that might not seem like anything all that special. After all, tales of obsessive and irrational lovesickness is as old as time and found within every single culture known to man. In a twisted sort of way, it's a character trope that reminds us that we're human, easily enslaved by our own emotions, both positive and negative. I mean, even the example anime given in the aforementioned site seems pretty standard. As said by Yuno Gasai from Mirai Nikki, I'm crazy? What's crazy is the world that refuses to let me be with you. And again, like I said, it's extreme passion, but it's nothing we haven't seen before. An individual proclaiming that the world is in the wrong because they're in love with someone? That's quite literally on the same level as Romeo and Juliet, one of the most well-known love stories of all time. A story of two insane lovers whose families' hatred of each other control the very world that they live in. Insane to the point that the two die over the very idea that they couldn't be together. But here's the tricky thing about yandere that separates it from the more Western understanding of violent lovesickness. Rather than both individuals of the couple being willing to kill themselves for the sake of each other, with yandere, it's more like one of the individuals is willing to kill the entire world to be with the other. With the female typically playing the role of the dangerously obsessive character, and the male playing the role of the oblivious, uninterested, or reluctant counterpart character. And when I say kill the entire world, I really mean it. With some cases of yandere being more on the level of, girl, I'll beat you to a pulp if you look at the man I'm trying to land, most yandere and otaku pop media will straight up murder anyone that looks at their target with any sort of intention besides everyday mundanity. And even that might be a trigger for them. So I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are asking, Gaijin, why are you bringing this up? I mean, we already know what a yandere is. Why even bother doing this video at all? Well, for one, the idea of yandere and the very first yandere in Japanese history is something my patrons really want to hear about this month, and I'm more than willing to oblige. For two, while I know a lot of you are well aware of this trope, what you might not know is that this exact character type, the quiet girl who turns into a demon who kills anyone that gets in her way with her obsessive love, isn't as young of a Japanese fictional story as you might think. In fact, the first Japanese story of a woman so smitten in love that she becomes a brutal demon is both very old and far more literal and brutal than most modern day examples. Yeah, you thought Ayano Aishi was a monster? It does not beat this girl. And for three, in the process of doing all this research for this video on Japan's very first yandere, it not only challenged my individual perception of this trope, but something rang eerily familiar when compared to similar Western counterparts like Romeo and Juliet, and how we as a society perceive them then and now. But in order to do all that, let me tell you the tale of the very first yandere in Japan. During the Heian period in 929 during the reign of Emperor Daigo, there lived a beautiful young girl named Kiyohime, who lived with her father, a shoji or caretaker of Manago Manor in modern-day Wakayama. It was a fairly well-known location that made for a popular resting place for various monks who were on a pilgrimage to nearby Kumano-Sanzan just south of the manor, including the other major character of this tale, a young handsome monk named Anshin who was traveling from Mutsu. Though his time there was brief, Kiyohime fell insatiably in love with him. Now, I'm not sure how or why, the story and their variations never seemed to tell the part, but suffice to say, she was insane for the guy. She pressed him over and over again to stay with her in her lodgings, but he refused, eventually stating that when he returned to the manor on his trip back, then he would stay with her. I assume he panicked and just said whatever he could to get her off his back. But as Kiyohime waited for Anshin's return, he did not. She began asking some of the other travelers if they'd seen him, and they told her that Anshin had already passed by the manor. Kiyohime chased after Anshin in a sprint, and when she finally caught up to him on the trail, he claimed mistaken identity, but Kiyohime was having none of it. Anshin ran and ran and ran all the way to the Hidaka River. There, he got on the ferryman's boat and told him not to take Kiyohime across the river after he returned to shore. Kiyohime, realizing she had been lied to and betrayed, leapt in the Hidaka River and swam to the other side. But as she did, her body began to transform. her clothes melding into a serpentine body, her head shifting to that of a dragon, and she breathed a vengeful fire from her mouth. She had become a whole Nari Hanya, basically an over 9,000 power level female Oni. She swam all the way across the Hidaka River and chased Anshin well past the shore, eventually sending him to the temple of Doljolji. The priest there, seeing the devilish serpent woman giving him chase, hid Anshin within the temple's great bronze bell. But Kiyohime, fully transformed with heightened senses, could smell Anshin within the bell. Overcome with rage and sadness of denial, she wrapped her snake-like body around the bell and torched it until it was white hot, and Anshin was cooked alive inside, unable to escape. Kiyohime, having had her revenge, was overtaken by a greater grief of regret so huge that she threw herself in the Hidaka River and drowned herself. So yeah, if you thought the yandere you typically see in anime were terrifying, how about an obsessive girl that turns into a literal monster rather than a metaphorical one? Now, like most folktales, there are a few different variations when it comes to the details. In some versions, for example, Anshin actually led on Kiyohime when they first met, some even saying that they had a night of romance together. And when Anshin came back on the return trip, he purposely ignored and kept away from Kiyohime's home, thus driving her into a heartbroken rage versus a yandere rage, which would make for a far more logical story, I suppose. Then there were other versions that I read where Anshin would actually travel to Shoji Manor every year in his pilgrimages and promise Kiyohime that if she was good, he would marry her when she grew up. Thus, again, that would be a whole other moral its own. But the majority of the versions that I've read, Kiyohime let her obsession drive her from the start while Anshin tried to reject her advances until he had to literally flee from her and into his demise by her hand. The great irony here, though, is that this story, ideally, is supposed to be a parable on the dangers of uncontrolled emotions and how they drive one to make disastrous decisions. But surprisingly, similar stories set in the modern day have created a drastically different response from the audience that indulge in them. Rather than being terrified of a yandere character, many people from both the East and West find them desirable. And you know what? It's kinda hard to discern whether or not that's a good or bad thing. I mean, on one hand, you have an excessively obsessive individual who, in some instances, will hurt or kill for the sake of being with that person that they love so incessantly. That in itself should be a pretty obvious red flag when it comes to any relationship. But I did some digging around and found that, from the perspective of yandere fans, I kinda understand where the interest is coming from. See, the true horror of this genre comes from the idea that yandere are not receiving the love and attention back from their target. I mean, it's what drives the entire concept of the trope. But what if they did? What if a yandere character actually got their desired relationship? One of the most consistent things that I've seen from a few fans is how they interpret a yandere's obsession as trustworthy devotion. And in their minds, a yandere who potentially has returned love is one that they see as positive. Now, I know that sounds strange, but try to pick up what I'm putting down. There's something to be said about not only trust in a relationship, but a physical and emotional work to prove the words. To see a girl put everything she can into making a relationship work despite how uphill it may be, it's something that a lot of these fans admire and even wish for in a significant other. One specific individual stating that, quote, "She makes you feel special, important, and unique. When something is important and special to you or them, we're willing to take action and protect it. It's most people with low self-esteem and lacks confidence in themselves that make them vulnerable to attract yandere personalities because yandere value them above all else." That's kinda legit. From my heterosexual perspective, I agree that what I want in a relationship is to be with someone who makes me feel special and important. I think a lot of men would echo the sentiment as well. Deep down, I feel like the majority of us really just want to be with someone that makes us feel special. Just as many ladies want to be treated like a queen by their men, men want to be treated like a king by their gals. And when you see a character, even in an ultra hyperfixated state, show such devotion to someone that they love, it's kinda hard not to want to have that in a significant other. Maybe not in the same murderous intent, but that same kind of intensity. Someone who puts in the actions to back up their words. I mean, let's be real, ladies. How many of you have ever been threatened by another woman thinking to yourself, "You better step off my man"? It's pretty natural as far as humanity goes in my experiences. And in a sense, that's what a yandere is, just taken to an extreme. And while murdering in the name of love isn't exactly condonable, the act of seeing someone fight, and I mean fight, for their would-be significant other is oddly inspiring. Not to say that we want our wives or girlfriends to physically attack other women, but when a guy sees that their gal is willing to take action to actively protect their relationship, it's endearing and desirable. It's not about violently lashing out, it's about proving how much you care about the relationship by doing everything in your power to protect it. And then I look at the story of Kiyohime and all I can think to myself is, man, fans of Yandere could look at this and really try to root for Kiyohime to make this work. That they would be impressed to see that, yeah, she transformed into a literal devil because she wanted to be with this guy this bad and went completely supernatural in order to make it happen. I know it sounds crazy, I thought it was crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more it really seemed to make sense. I mean, just like how Romeo and Juliet, a play warning people of the dangers of unchecked emotion, has turned into the penultimate story of, quote, true love, the story of Kiyohime and the concept of yandere have transformed from yet another tale warning of the dangers of unchecked emotion into a modern-day desired state of circumstance. And I get it. Despite how we joke about the concept of yandere, I mean, to a point where an overly violent parody game is made from the trope, there's absolutely something to be said about the desire for devoted love, proven in practice and highly protected. I think there really is something to say about how, much like the story of Romeo and Juliet, the story of a yandere character like Kiyohime has evolved in Japanese society into anime tropes that are actually desired. But what do you all think? What side of this fence do you find yourself on when it comes to this concept of yandere? Is it just dangerous over-obsessiveness, or is there something to all this madness? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching. And thank you patrons for supporting videos just like this and voting on this topic. Granted, I went a little bit harder on this one, going a lot deeper than just, quote, the first yandere, but it gave me a chance to reflect on an idea and why people would enjoy it, and it was really interesting to contemplate. And if you thought it was interesting too, and you like the stuff we do here, be sure to sub up, get notified, and until next time everyone, this is Gaijin Kumba, signing out.